What kind of man would marry the woman everyone called the ugliest in town? In Cedar Ridge, whispers turned cruel laughter into daggers. Children sang taunts at Martha Hale's door, while Jace Callahan, the coldest cowboy of them all, walked silently by her side. On their wedding day, the veil was lifted, not to reveal shame, but the scar of a woman who once ran into fire to save a child. Flames, betrayal, and buried truths threatened to consume them again. A town mocked, a secret long hidden, a forgotten child thought lost in the ashes. And yet, against every sneer, every lie, courage rose. Stay, and witness how one scar became the proof of a hero, how a cowboy's vow turned whispers into thunderous applause, and how love found its truest worth beneath the veil. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you'd like more tales of courage and love, please subscribe. It means the world to us. The town of Cedar Ridge woke restless that morning. Sunlight spilled over the rooftops, gilding the crooked chimneys in soft gold, but peace did not follow the dawn. Instead, whispers rose like smoke, curling through alleys, slipping beneath doors, clinging to every porch. By the time the church bell rang 9, every tongue wagged the same shocking tale. Jace Callahan, the cowboy colder than a mountain stream, the man who had never courted, never lingered at a dance, never tipped his hat to a woman, had asked Martha Hale to marry him. The words tasted absurd on the lips of shopkeepers and ranch hands alike, yet they repeated them with relish, their disbelief spiced with mockery. Inside Murphy's general store, where the scent of flour and kerosene hung heavy, Tom Murphy leaned his elbows across the counter and thundered his version of the news. A stout man of 50 with a shiny bald crown and cheeks perpetually flushed by whiskey, Murphy lived for gossip almost as much as profit. "Callahan's gone soft in the head," he barked, slapping the counter with his palm. "Martha Hale! Can you imagine? Either the man's bewitched or he's bargaining his soul for something." The room erupted in laughter, each chuckle echoing sharper than the last. At the saloon, the tale took on darker hues. Jake Morrison, lean and wiry in his mid-30s, with slicked black hair and eyes always half-drunk with mischief, leaned back in his chair like a king on a throne of lies. He twisted a toothpick between his lips and smirked. "He ain't marrying her for love," he drawled. "That woman's never known love a day in her life. No, it's land or money or some spell she's cast. You mark me." The crowd around him laughed loudest of all, drunk on malice. And by noon, the rumor had spilled into the streets. Children picked it up like a game of marbles, their shrill voices turning cruelty into song. In her dress shop, Martha Hale bent over a torn hem, the needle trembling between her fingers. She was 40, though years of solitude made her seem older. Auburn hair, streaked with gray, was tied into a knot at her neck. Her dresses were plain, her hands roughened by endless work, her pale green eyes always lowered, as if braced for ridicule before it came. She had been invisible for so long that people mistook their mockery for harmless habit. But now, because of one rumor, Cedar Ridge had dragged her onto its stage. Outside her window, children clapped their hands and sang, "Old Maid Martha, ugly as sin, Cowboy Jace got tricked again." The cruel rhyme pierced the walls sharper than any blade. Martha froze. The needle slipped, pricking her skin. A bead of crimson welled and bled into the cloth. She rose unsteadily and pushed open the shop door. Sunlight struck her face, catching the faint shadow along her left cheek that she so often hid beneath her bonnet. The children shrieked louder, their eyes wide with delight at her tears. Martha lifted a trembling hand as if to quiet them, but the words caught in her throat. Her arm fell back to her side, useless. The laughter swelled, merciless, filling the dusty street with mockery. Then silence fell. From the far end of town came the measured thud of hooves. The children's voices died mid-chant. Men turned from their work. Women leaned out from porches. Jace Callahan approached, reins loose in one hand, his black horse moving beside him like a shadow. He was 32, tall, broad-shouldered, his face carved by sun and storm, his jaw shadowed by stubble. Beneath the brim of his hat, his eyes were gray steel, unreadable. He walked as if the noise of the town could not touch him, each bootstep striking the dirt with the rhythm of inevitability. He stopped before Martha. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. Jace said nothing. With a calm that cut sharper than words, he reached for Martha's elbow. His grip was steady, firm, but not rough, anchoring her against the tide of eyes that threatened to drown her. And then he walked. Through the center of Cedar Ridge, with Martha Hale at his side, Jace Callahan strode in silence. The children shrank back, their cruel song unfinished. Shopkeepers and ranch hands stared, whispers burning on their tongues, but trapped behind clenched teeth. Women pressed hands to their mouths, torn between laughter and shock. Martha's cheeks glistened with tears, her bonnet trembling as she lowered her head. But she did not resist. The cowboy's presence shielded her like a wall of stone. His gaze remained fixed ahead, unbothered by sneers, as if daring anyone to step forward. It was a sight no one had imagined. The coldest man in town, walking with the most scorned woman, not in secrecy, but in defiance. When they reached the corner and vanished from view, murmurs rushed in to fill the silence. Confusion, suspicion, disbelief. Cedar Ridge gorged itself on them all. Jake Morrison spat into the dirt, his smirk as poisonous as ever. "This ain't love," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Something darker's at play." You'll see heads nodded, whispers reignited. Some muttered of curses, others of bargains. But one question grew louder than all the rest, carried in every glance, every hushed breath, every rumor that spread anew. Why would Jace Callahan, the man who trusted no one, choose Martha Hale, the woman Cedar Ridge had scorned most of all? Cedar Ridge woke under a heavy sky, and with it came the echo of yesterday's spectacle. The streets smelled of damp dust and coffee boiling on stoves, but beneath that ordinary rhythm beat the same pulse of rumor that had carried through the night. People greeted each other not with courtesies, but with smirks and questions. Had anyone seen Jace Callahan after he walked Martha Hale through the heart of town? Had the engagement been confirmed? Would there truly be a wedding? By mid-morning, every shopfront hummed with speculation. Men leaned on railings, swapping theories like playing cards. Women carried baskets of bread and whispered sharp judgments. The town, once sleepy, now had the taste of blood in its mouth, and all of it circled around one unlikely pair, the cold cowboy and the seamstress no one had ever loved. The saloon was thick with voices. Laughter rattled against glass tumblers. Boots stomped in rhythm to some cruel joke only they shared. At the general store, Tom Murphy's booming laugh punctuated every retelling, as if his volume alone proved the tale true. On the steps of the church, two matrons murmured behind their gloved hands, their eyes darting toward the dress shop on Main Street. In their stories, Jace was never a man simply making a choice. He was bewitched, or bribed, or bound by some shameful debt. In their stories, Martha was not a woman, but a shadow, an old maid, a curse, a punchline. Only one pair of eyes watched differently. Sarah Coleman had heard enough by noon. She sat at her desk in the small schoolhouse, chalk dust on her skirt, and listened to her students whisper the cruel song they had learned in the street. Old maid Martha, ugly as sin. The words stung, even spoken by children too young to understand their cruelty. Sarah set down the chalk and dismissed class early. She could not stand the sound of it. Sarah was 30, with a frame lean from years of hard work. Her hair, dark blonde, was pulled into a tight bun, though strands escaped often, softening her stern appearance. Her blue eyes were sharp when she scolded, but warm when she read aloud. She had lived in Cedar Ridge for 6 years, long enough to know the rhythm of its gossip, and though she too had heard the whispers about Martha for years, she had never joined in. She knew loneliness when she saw it. That afternoon, with storm clouds pressing low, Sarah crossed the street and pushed open the door to Martha's dress shop. The hinges groaned in protest, as if warning her not to enter. Inside, the room smelled faintly of cloth and lamp oil. Bolts of fabric leaned tiredly against the walls. Martha sat hunched at her table, the needle slipping clumsily in her hand. Martha looked up, her pale green eyes swollen from lack of sleep. She wore a gray shawl wrapped tight, as if it could shield her from everything outside. Her lips parted, trembling. "You came to see me fall apart too?" "No," Sarah said softly, stepping closer. "I came to see if you're all right." A silent stretch between them, filled only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Martha's hands fumbled with a scrap of fabric, and as she shifted, the shawl slipped from her shoulder. For a brief moment, the light from the window struck her face, and Sarah saw it, saw the scar. It ran from cheek to jawline, the skin twisted and puckered, a wound long healed but never forgotten. It was not merely a blemish, but a story burned into flesh. Sarah gasped before she could stop herself. Martha clutched the shawl back around her face, horror flashing in her eyes. "Please," she whispered, desperate, "don't say anything. Don't let them know you've seen. I beg you." Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding. She nodded, but her mind whirled. The scar explained the whispers, the averted gazes, the cruel songs. Yet it also raised more questions than it answered. What had happened to Martha Hale? And what did it have to do with Jace Callahan? That evening, the saloon filled with the smell of whiskey and smoke. Jace Callahan stepped inside, his boots cutting the laughter short for a moment. He carried silence like a weapon, his gray eyes cold beneath the brim of his hat. Men nudged each other, goading him. "Tell us, Jace," one voice barked, half drunk. "Did she hex you? Or are you marrying her for her little shack of a shop?" Another voice chimed in, sharper. "Maybe she bought you outright." "What's the price of your pride, Callahan?" Jace set his glass on the counter, the sound sharp enough to cut the air. He spoke without raising his voice, but each word carried across the room. "She saved my life," he said, "and I'll repay that debt the only way I know." The saloon fell into silence. The men blinked, unsettled. Some laughed nervously, others frowned, confused. But Jace offered no more. He turned, finished his drink, and left the room as quietly as he had entered. By nightfall, Cedar Ridge burned with new questions. If Martha had once saved Jace, when? From what? And why had no one in the town remembered such a thing? Sarah Coleman sat in her cabin, the lamplight flickering across her face. She thought of Martha's scar, of the way her voice had trembled in desperation, and of Jace's unwavering claim. She felt the pieces circling, fragments of a story buried beneath ash and silence. She whispered to herself, almost like a vow, "I'll find the truth." Across town, Martha sat in her dim shop, the shawl clutched tightly around her face. Her hands shook as she whispered to the darkness, "Let them never know. Let them never remember." Outside, the wind carried the laughter of the town, shrill and merciless. And in that laughter was a single, unspoken question, growing sharper with every passing hour. What was Martha Hale hiding? The morning of the wedding broke with a strange stillness, as if Cedar Ridge itself were holding its breath. Clouds dragged across the sky, thick and low, dimming the light over the white-painted church that stood at the edge of Main Street. By early noon, the building swelled with townsfolk. Every seat in the pews was filled, and those left standing leaned against the walls or crowded by the open doors. The air smelled of dust, perfume, and damp wood. Fans flicked open and shut. Children wriggled on laps, but even their usual restlessness was stilled by anticipation. They had come not for vows, not for blessing, but for spectacle. The cruel delight of seeing Martha Hale, long the target of jokes, stand exposed before them. At the front, Martha sat with her hands clasped around a bouquet of wildflowers. Her fingers shook, crushing stems until beads of dew slid down her knuckles. A thin veil, carefully pinned, cascaded over her face. Beneath its gauzy cover, she tried to breathe steadily, but every breath was shallow. The church felt less like a sanctuary than a theater in which she was cast unwillingly as the fool. Beside her stood Jace Callahan. His face was carved in stone, eyes set forward. He did not glance at the crowd, nor at the whispers. He stood as though rooted, shoulders squared, hat removed out of reverence, but his presence commanding like a soldier at attention. The minister, a man in his 70s with white hair combed neatly back, skin spotted and lined from decades under the sun, opened his worn Bible with hands that trembled only slightly. His name was Reverend Amos Green, a figure who had presided over baptisms, funerals, and marriages in Cedar Ridge longer than most could remember. Yet even his steady voice faltered under the weight of expectation that morning. He called for silence, and silence fell, sharp and brittle. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Green began, his words echoing off the walls. But the crowd listened less to him than to the whispering silence beneath. They were waiting, waiting for the veil. The vows were spoken with little interruption. Martha's responses were quiet, nearly lost in the heavy hush, while Jace's were firm, clear, unyielding. When the moment came, the moment all Cedar Ridge had gathered to witness, the Reverend turned to Jace. "You may lift the veil." Everybody leaned forward. Pews groaned under the shift of weight. The air itself seemed to strain. Jace's hands rose slowly, deliberately. His fingers found the edge of the veil, and in a single motion, he lifted it away. The gasp that erupted rattled the church rafters. The veil slipped back, and the scar was revealed. It swept across Martha's cheek and jaw, twisted and puckered, the mark of fire. Years of whispers found their proof in an instant. The crowd recoiled, women pressing gloved hands to their mouths, men shifting uncomfortably, some smirking openly at the confirmation of their mockery. But then came the greater shock. Recognition flickered across faces. Murmurs rose like wind through dry grass. "I know that scar," someone whispered. She looks like..." "Impossible." Martha closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling, as though she could not bear the weight of their stares. Jace did not hesitate. He turned to the crowd, his voice ringing out with the certainty of iron. 15 years ago, a barn by the river burned. Many of you remember the smoke. Many of you remember the screams. And you remember the woman who went in to save the children and never came out. A ripple surged through the congregation. Faces tightened, eyes darted, memories long buried, rising unwanted. Jace looked to Martha, then back to the crowd. "That woman did not die. She lived, and you sit before her now. Martha Hale is the one who braved the fire that night." Gasps, denials, shouts. The church filled with noise. Reverend Green's mouth opened, but no words came. He remembered that fire, too. Everyone did. But they had all believed, had been told, the woman had perished. Martha lifted her chin at last, her voice breaking but steady enough to carry. "It was me," she whispered. "I carried children out that night. The flames took my face, but not my life." The crowd surged again. Confusion, disbelief, and anger clashed in the air. And then Jace's words cut deeper still. "I know, because I was one of those children. She pulled me out with her own hands. I stand alive because of her." A stunned silence fell. The revelation cracked like thunder. The whispers turned to stunned looks, faces paling as the connection was made. But before the shock could settle into understanding, a voice rose above the rest, sharp, indignant, defiant. "That cannot be true!" All eyes swung to the back of the church. A man had risen, his face red with outrage, his finger stabbing toward the couple at the altar. He was broad-shouldered, with dark hair streaked with gray, his features twisted with disbelief. He was Earl Whitman, a farmer who had lived near the barn, known for his stubbornness and his certainty in his own memory. "I saw that fire with my own eyes," Earl shouted, his voice echoing off the wood. "I saw who went in. I saw who never came out. This is a trick. She's lying to him, to all of us." Gasps, murmurs, shifting feet. The church was in chaos again, but this time darker, heavier. Doubt sank its claws deep. Martha stood trembling, her scarred face uncovered, the truth spoken yet already under attack. Jace's hand closed firmly over hers, his body shielding her from the weight of the stairs. The ceremony, the vows, the marriage, all of it had been drowned beneath something far greater. A battle for truth itself. And as the congregation roiled, Earl Whitman's denial rang louder than the bells outside, louder than the Reverend's failing calls for order, louder than the pounding of Martha's fragile heart. "It cannot be true," he cried again. "It is a lie." The words hung in the air like smoke refusing to fade, a challenge no one could ignore, a spark ready to ignite something far worse than rumor. The Church of Cedar Ridge trembled under the weight of Earl Whitman's accusation. His voice still echoed against the rafters. "That cannot be true," while the congregation writhed like a disturbed hive. Some shouted agreement, others muttered in confusion. The air was hot, thick, and restless, as if the fire from 15 years ago had returned in spirit, licking at every wooden beam and every guilty heart. At the altar, Martha Hale clutched her crushed bouquet, her face pale beneath the scar that glowed in the dim light. Jace Callahan's hand remained firm around hers, but his eyes had hardened, scanning the sea of doubters. His voice rose, calm, yet ringing like steel against stone. "You call her a liar," he said, gray eyes narrowing, "but I have carried proof with me all these years." From the inner pocket of his coat, Jace drew a small object wrapped in a worn leather pouch. He untied it slowly, deliberately, and revealed a medallion, once silver, now blackened and twisted by flame. Its edges curled like paper, its center charred, but faintly, a carved cross still gleamed. Gasps rippled through the pews. Women craned their necks, men leaned forward. The medallion caught what little light filtered through the church's tall windows, shining with the weight of memory. "This," Jace declared, holding it aloft, "was pressed into my palm the night she pulled me from the fire. She gave it to me when I was a boy, so I would not forget who saved me. I have carried it every day since a hush fell, but not one of reverence, one of hesitation." People shifted in their seats, eyes darting between the scar on Martha's face and the medallion in Jace's hand. Doubt did not die easily. From the front pew, Jake Morrison rose. He was in his late 30s, his lanky frame always moving with restless energy, as though stirred by whiskey even when sober. His dark hair fell unkempt across his brow, his smile sharp and mean. He had always lived in the shadow of stronger men, and he wore bitterness like a second skin. Jake pointed a finger at Martha, then at Jace. "A burnt trinket proves nothing. You could have dug that from the ashes yourself. What you're trying to sell us is a story no one remembers the same way. Why? Because it never happened like you say." The crowd stirred again, stirred by the venom in Jake's tone. Before Jace could answer, another voice cut through the noise, deeper, older, carrying the weight of authority. "That's enough." The congregation turned as Sheriff Walt Danner stepped down the aisle. At 60, he was broad-shouldered but stooped with years. His brown deputy's coat stretched across a belly that told of slower days. His gray mustache twitched as he frowned, and his boots echoed heavy on the floorboards. He removed his hat slowly, holding it against his chest. His eyes scanned the room before settling on Martha, then Jace, then the restless crowd. "The Callahan boy speaks the truth," Danner said at last. His voice trembled, not from age but from guilt. "The records say Martha Hale died in that fire because I signed them. I signed them knowing they were false." The church gasped. Even Jake faltered. Danner's gaze fell heavy, his jaw tightening. "There were men in this town, men with money and power, who told me to bury her name. They said her story would stir trouble, that it was better for everyone if she were forgotten. I agreed, and I wrote down a lie. For 15 years, I carried that stain." Martha's eyes filled with tears. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You let them erase me." Danner's head bowed. "I did, and I will answer for it before this town and before God." The congregation erupted again, outrage and disbelief colliding. Some shouted for justice, others demanded names. The rafters shook with the noise. Through it all, Martha trembled, her shoulders hunched under the crushing weight of memory. She had been branded a liar, erased by official words, and now her name was dragged once more into fire. Jace slid the medallion into her hands, his voice low but firm. "They can shout all they want. I know the truth, and so do you." For a heartbeat, it seemed the truth might finally find its place. But Jake Morrison was not finished. His face twisted with triumph, his voice cutting through the din like a whip. If she lived, if she really walked out of that fire, then who was left behind? The church stilled. Every head turned, every eye narrowed. Jake's words slithered into their hearts, feeding on doubt, on the need for blame. He spread his arms wide, his smile cruel. "Think about it. We all remember the smoke. We all remember the screaming. There were children in that barn. If Martha came out alive, then whose bones were left inside? Did she save one boy and let another burn?" The silence was suffocating. Martha's breath caught, her hands clenching around the medallion until its scorched edges bit into her palm. She shook her head, her lips parting, but no words came. The weight of accusation pressed too hard. The townspeople shifted uneasily. Whispers spread like sparks. Another child. a forgotten child, left behind. Jace stepped forward, fury flashing in his eyes, but Jake's smirk only widened. He had planted the seed, and it grew instantly in the soil of Cedar Ridge's suspicion. At the pulpit, Reverend Green slammed his Bible shut, the crack echoing like a gunshot. His aged voice trembled with strain. "Enough! This is a house of God!" But even within those walls, the question lingered, poisonous and unrelenting. If Martha Hale lived, then who did not? The church doors had barely stopped shaking from Jake Morrison's venom when silence fell again, heavy, suffocating, like smoke trapped in rafters. The words lingered in every ear. If she lived, then who was left behind? Martha Hale stood trembling at the altar, the charred medallion still clutched in her palm. The air pressed down on her, the crowd stares drilling into her scar, as though the flame had returned to finish what it started. Jace Callahan kept his stance beside her, jaw locked tight, but even he could feel the town's judgment shift. The whispers began, low but poisonous. A child left in the fire? Did she only save one? Could she have turned back? Martha tried to speak, her lips quivering, but no sound emerged. Shame wrapped around her like the veil she no longer wore. Then, from the back of the church, a voice rasped, thin but sharp as a blade. "You fools! You think she abandoned anyone? You think you know what really happened that night?" The crowd turned, parting for a small, bent figure stepping down the aisle. It was Eliza Carter, an elderly woman nearing 80. Her frame stooped with years, bones thin as branches, but her eyes, pale blue and piercing, cut through the haze like moonlight. Her hair, white and wispy, was braided and tucked beneath a faded shawl patterned with roses long since dulled. She leaned on a carved cane, each step slow but unyielding. Gasps rose as recognition spread. Eliza had lived near the river barns for decades, the silent widow who rarely left her porch except for church. Few had heard her speak more than a greeting in years. Now her voice cracked across the pews with sudden strength. "I was there. I saw the fire. I saw Martha go in, not once, but twice." The murmurs faltered. Eliza's gaze swept the congregation, her cane striking the floor with each word. "She carried out one child, your boy Jace, half dead and choking. Then she turned back. I saw her disappear into the flames again. And when she emerged, it wasn't with another child. It was with nothing but smoke in her lungs, and a man, God curse him, dragging her away." Her words silenced the hall. Only the wind through the open door dared to stir. Martha's knees buckled, tears burning her eyes. She had buried the memory, the searing moment, when hands had pulled her back, locking her out while the barn screamed with the cries of another child. Jace's grip steadied her, but his chest burned. "Then it wasn't her fault," he said fiercely. Eliza shook her head, lips pressed tight. "Fault? Number. But listen well, all of you. That second child, he did not die." The church erupted again, but this time with shock. Eliza raised a trembling hand, silencing them with sheer force of will. "I saw men, strangers, come in the smoke. They pulled the boy from the back door. They carried him off before the flames took him. They vanished with him into the night." Her words fell like stones into a pond, each ripple spreading further. "He lived," Eliza said, her voice breaking. "But he was taken, hidden, raised under another name." Martha's breath came in sobs. "All these years." Jace's jaw clenched, his eyes locked on Eliza. "Do you know who? Do you know where?" Eliza leaned heavier on her cane, her frame shaking. "I was old then, and older now. But I remember one thing. The men who took him drove north, toward the rail line, toward the settlements beyond." She lifted her gaze, bright with certainty. "If you look, you will find him. The forgotten child is not forgotten at all." The church split with noise again. Shock, outrage, suspicion. Some clung to doubt, unwilling to release their cruelty. Others murmured in awe, shaken by the weight of Eliza's testimony. Jake Morrison snarled, his voice cutting through. "Convenient tale from a woman half crazed with age. You expect us to believe some boy lived, whisked away in the night? Then where is he now?" But the seed was planted, and the crowd was listening not to Jake, but to the trembling voice of Eliza Carter. Martha lifted her face at last, scar catching the light. "If he lives," she whispered, "then we must find him. We must prove it." Jace turned, his storm-gray eyes blazing. "Then we will. I swear it." Sheriff Danner stepped forward, shame shadowing his face. "If what Eliza says is true, then the records were not only false, they were a cover for theft. I owe this town, and I owe you, Martha. I'll open every archive, every line of ink we buried. We will uncover the truth." But Martha shook her head. Her voice, quiet but fierce, carried through the hall. "Not in the papers. Not in the lies men wrote. The truth lives in the child. If he breathes, then he is the only proof we need." Silence fell once more, deep and solemn. The congregation stared, hearts pounding with the realization that the fire of 15 years ago had not burned out. It smoldered still, waiting to be fanned into new flame. And then, from the doorway, thunder rolled. A storm had gathered, lightning flashing against the horizon. The sky split with light as though to underscore the vow hanging in the air. The forgotten child had lived. And now they would have to find him. The storm that had thundered over Cedar Ridge did not wash away the questions left behind. Instead, it carved a path for Jace Callahan and Martha Hale, a path that led beyond the town's borders, into wild country where truth might be hiding. 3 days after Eliza Carter's testimony, Jace saddled his horse at dawn. Martha stood beside him, her scarred face set firm despite the doubt still ringing in her ears. She wore a plain cloak, the hood pulled low, but there was no hiding who she was now. Jace held her gaze. "If David lives," he said, tightening the saddle straps, "then we'll find him." Martha's voice trembled, though her eyes did not. "I've lived too long as a ghost. I won't rest until I see him with my own eyes." They set off northward, following the vague directions Eliza had given. The men who had taken the boy had fled toward the rail line, toward scattered settlements beyond the ridges. The land was rough, the paths narrow and twisting. The second day, a storm struck, lashing them with rain that turned the dirt trails to rivers of mud. Martha's cloak clung heavy to her shoulders, but she pressed on, her hands gripping the saddle horn as Jace guided the horses through sheets of water. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolling like the memory of the fire that had scarred her face. Yet, she did not falter. On the third day, they reached a village tucked into the low hills, a place of sawmills and smoke where strangers drew long stares. In the tavern, Jace asked questions, his voice low, his manner calm but unyielding. "We're looking for a young man," he said, "taken from Cedar Ridge 15 years ago. He would have been a child, brought north by men in the night." The barkeep, a stout woman with strong arms and a keen eye, wiped her hands on her apron. "Plenty of children come through here. Orphans, runaways, farm hands sold for labor. But," she frowned, thinking, "there was one. Found near the line, burned and coughing as if smoke still lived in his lungs. A farmer took him in. Gave him a new name. Rowan, I believe." Martha's breath caught. Her hand trembled on the counter. "Where?" Jace pressed. The woman nodded toward the valley beyond. "Rowan Farm, 2 miles east." They rode hard, the hills rolling into view, until a modest farmstead appeared. A weathered house, a small barn, fields green with early shoots. A young man worked in the dirt, sleeves rolled, his hands scarred from years of toil. He looked up as they approached, and in that instant Martha's heart stopped. His eyes, hazel, steady, were the same she remembered from the fire, when they had looked at her through smoke and terror. He straightened slowly, wariness flickering across his sunburnt face. He was tall, lean, with blonde hair curling at the collar, sweat clinging to his brow. A life of labor had hardened his body, but his gaze carried a gentleness that did not belong to bitterness. "Can I help you?" he asked. Martha slid from her horse, her knees trembling. "David?" Her voice cracked, the name trembling on her lips. The young man's brow furrowed. "My name's David Rowan. Who are you?" She stepped closer, pulling back her hood, revealing the scar that traced her cheek and jaw. The afternoon sun caught it, shining pale against her skin. Gasps rose from the farmhands nearby. David froze. His eyes widened, recognition crashing into him like a long-delayed storm. "I know you," he whispered, "the woman in the fire." His hands shook. "I was a child, choking, trapped. And you carried me. I remember your voice. You told me to hold on." His throat closed. "I never forgot." Not once Martha's tears streamed freely as she reached for him. "I thought you lost. For 15 years I thought the flames took you." David stepped forward, pulling her into a trembling embrace. "You saved me. You saved us both." Jace's eyes burned as he watched them. The medallion glinted in Martha's hand, the same token she had once pressed into him, now mirrored by the living proof before them. The truth had found its way back. They returned to Cedar Ridge a week later, David riding with them. Word spread ahead of their arrival, the town bracing itself for Judgment Day. On Market Day, the square filled again, this time not for mockery, but for revelation. The townsfolk gathered in uneasy silence as Martha, Jace, and David stepped forward. Sheriff Danner stood at their side, his hat clutched tight, his voice rough. "Cedar Ridge, you've heard whispers and lies. Today, hear the truth." David Rowan's voice carried clear and strong across the square. "I was the child you thought burned. I lived because Martha Hale braved the fire. I am her witness. She did not abandon me. She saved me." Gasps broke. Murmurs surged, but this time not of suspicion, of shame, of disbelief undone. David raised his scarred hands, showing the burns long healed. "These are the marks of the night she pulled me through the flames. If you doubt her, look at me. I am your proof." Silence followed, then a ripple of clapping, hesitant at first, then swelling. Jake Morrison lurked at the edge of the crowd, his face pale, his smirk long gone. Voices turned on him now, whispers pointing to the man who had spat the cruelest doubts. Someone shouted, "Liar!" Another, "Snake!" Jake's eyes darted, but the crowd pressed him with their silence, heavier than stone. At last, he spat into the dirt, turned his back, and walked out of Cedar Ridge. His boots echoed on the road until they were gone, and with him the last whisper of scorn. The square erupted, this time in cheers. Martha stood weeping, David's hand in one of hers, Jace's in the other. For the first time in her life, she stood not as an outcast, not as a ghost, but as herself, survivor, savior, bride. Reverend Green, frail but strong in voice, raised his hands. "This is the worth of a bride, not in beauty nor in gold, but in the courage to walk through fire and still stand." The words settled like a benediction. Jace turned to Martha, storm-gray eyes softening, his voice breaking just enough for the town to hear its truth. "This is the woman I love. She is the bravest, most beautiful soul I will ever know." The applause swelled into thunder, rolling across the square, carrying Martha's name as though it had always belonged to honor, not ridicule. The veil was gone. The bride had claimed her true worth. In the end, Martha's story reminds us that true beauty is never measured by a flawless face or by the whispers of a crowd. It lives in the quiet courage to keep walking forward, even when the world has turned its back. Through fire, through ridicule, and through years of silence, Martha showed us that the scars we carry can become the proof of love, sacrifice, and survival. And sometimes, when the veil is finally lifted, what we discover is not shame, but the unshakable worth of a heart that dared to endure. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and share where you're watching from. We cherish every voice in this community. And don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss the next story of courage, love, and redemption.